The winter of 1838 in the Wild West showed no mercy to anyone. The United States Army lost soldiers not to Indian bullets, but to simple frostbite and starvation. The military had the best equipment of the time, substantial budgets, and sturdy supply wagons. But when the snow cut off supply routes, all that military logistics proved completely useless. At the same time, entire Cherokee villages were calmly weathering the winter without even a tenth of the Army's supplies. White settlers sincerely believed that the winter forest was completely dead and empty. They looked at the snow-covered Appalachians and saw only an endless, icy desert with no chance of survival. The Cherokee looked at those same mountains and saw before them a vast, fully stocked supermarket. The only difference was that the Native Americans could read this forest like an open book. Their botanical knowledge was so advanced that modern biologists still shake their heads in amazement. In this video, we'll examine specific plant species that saved the Native Americans from starvation. You'll learn which of them are growing in North America right now and where to find them. We'll discuss a brilliant technique for drying herbs that preserves all active compounds without the slightest loss. You'll understand how the Cherokee tested unfamiliar plants using a real, scientifically sound method. This knowledge is worth more than gold if you find yourself far from the safety of civilization. Get ready to dive into the world of the true, harsh history of the American frontier. We'll leave the romance of Westerns aside and talk about tough, pragmatic survival. You'll understand why the U.S. Army couldn't break the resistance of the indigenous peoples for so long. It wasn't just a matter of guerrilla warfare tactics, but also the Native Americans' complete food self-sufficiency. Let's find out exactly what they ate while white generals were going mad with hunger. When snow blanketed the Appalachians, finding fresh food became an almost impossible task. Ordinary people fell into despair, seeing only bare tree trunks and ice before them. But for the Cherokee, an ordinary pine tree was the equivalent of a modern working bakery. Most settlers had no idea that coniferous trees could literally be eaten for breakfast. And this ignorance became one of the most fatal mistakes in the history of the continent's colonization. The secret lay in the sapwood, the inner layer of bark located right next to the trunk. This soft, light-colored layer is incredibly rich in carbohydrates, vitamins, and beneficial sugars. The Cherokee carefully peeled away the tough outer bark to get to this nutritious layer. It sounds strange, but in terms of calorie content, the sapwood could easily rival ordinary farm flour. Modern nutritionists would call it an organic, low-calorie superfood straight from the forest. But the Native Americans didn't just chew on raw bark like animals desperate from hunger. They dried the sapwood over a fire and ground it into a fine, light flour. From this flour, they baked flatbreads that could be stored for months without losing their quality. Imagine army rations, only made right in the middle of a remote winter forest. The taste was slightly bitter, but it saved entire villages from certain starvation. And now for the most interesting part, which shocked the first European doctors on the continent. Pine needles contain several times more vitamin C than the much-praised lemons from overseas. The Cherokee brewed a thick, aromatic tea from these needles, which they drank throughout the long winter. While sailors and pioneers were dying en masse from scurvy, the Native Americans were completely unfamiliar with this disease. The ancient tribe had solved the problem of vitamin deficiency centuries before scientists discovered vitamins. And that's not all the surprises the common American pine had in store. The tree's resin was used as a powerful antiseptic for deep wounds and cuts. Roman doctors treated wounds with vinegar, while Native Americans simply applied fresh sap to them. It literally sealed the cuts, killing bacteria and preventing any blood poisoning. Modern pharmaceuticals still use pine resin derivatives in their medicinal ointments. As you can see, a single tree provided people with food, hot drinks, and first-rate medicine. Pioneers built houses out of pine trees and then starved to death inside those very houses. They simply sat on their food, not understanding how exactly to use it to survive. This is the clearest example of how a lack of knowledge kills more surely than a well-aimed Native American bullet. It was not the one who brought more canned food who won, but the one who knew how to use the world around them. To harvest sapwood, there was no need to fell an entire massive tree to the ground. The Native Americans took exactly as much as they needed, leaving the trunk alive and perfectly healthy. This was the approach of a prudent steward who cares for his long-term forest resources. Modern industrial loggers destroy hectares of forest, leaving behind an empty wasteland. The Cherokee, however, understood perfectly well that this forest must feed their children and grandchildren. Today, you can find pine trees in virtually any coniferous forest in North America. If you ever find yourself in an extreme situation, remember this ancient bread. Just don't forget that you must take only the white inner layer, not the brown bark. My jaws start to ache just at the thought of trying to chew through the outer bark. Ancient methods require precision. Otherwise, they simply won't work in a critical moment. The U.S. Army spent many years trying to figure out this simple Native American secret. When scouts finally reported the pine flower to the generals, they couldn't believe it for a long time. The military thought the Native Americans were simply mocking them or eating the bark out of desperation, but the statistics on disease-related casualties stubbornly spoke in favor of the Native Americans. Sometimes excessive pride prevents civilized people from acknowledging the genius of simple solutions. In the end, the pine tree became a symbol of the hidden potential of the Appalachian winter forest. It is not just firewood, but a true biological survival station. The Cherokee respected this mighty tree and considered it one of nature's greatest gifts. And now, knowing these facts, you too will never look at a pine tree the same way again. But this was just one of many plants in their vast natural arsenal. Imagine you're in unfamiliar territory and your supplies are running out. The area is full of strange berries, leaves, and roots, but you have no idea what's edible. White pioneers in such situations often played Russian roulette with their stomachs. They tried everything in a row, hoping for luck, and this often ended in a painful death. The Cherokee, however, had a strict, almost laboratory-like algorithm for testing any unfamiliar flora. This method is still used by elite special forces units around the world. It is called the Universal Edibility Test, and Native Americans developed it through centuries of trial and error. The first rule was, never test an unfamiliar plant in its entirety all at once. They would separate it into roots, stems, leaves, and flowers, testing each part separately. Just because the root is edible doesn't mean the leaves won't kill you. The botanical testing process took more than a day and required ironclad patience. First, the Native American would simply rub the plant's sap into a sensitive area of skin, such as the wrist. Then he would wait several hours, watching closely to see if any redness or itching appeared. If the skin reacted normally, they would move on to the next riskier stage of testing. It sounds like a tedious allergy test in a modern clinic, but it worked flawlessly. Next came the lip test. A small piece of the plant was applied to the lips, and they waited. If a burning sensation or numbness appeared, the treacherous plant was immediately tossed aside. If everything was fine, the piece was placed on the tongue, without swallowing for another 15 minutes. This required tremendous self-control, especially when the stomach was cramping from ravenous hunger. But the Indians knew that it was better to endure hunger for one day than to die in terrible agony. Why didn't the U.S. Army use this ingenious method from the very beginning? The answer is simple. The soldiers simply lacked the patience and discipline for such lengthy tests. When a person is hungry, they want to immediately eat anything that looks even remotely appetizing. The irony is that the most beautiful and juicy berry in the forest is usually the most dangerous. The Cherokee learned this harsh lesson millennia before Europeans arrived on the continent. This step-by-step method saved thousands of lives during long, grueling treks. When the tribe migrated to new lands, they had to face a completely unfamiliar ecosystem. Thanks to their rigorous method, they quickly mapped out the new botanical landscape. Your office job requires degrees, but these guys were natural-born field biologists. They conducted toxicological studies right on tree stumps and fallen trees. Today, this Native American algorithm is taught in survival courses across North America. Instructors often pass it off as a cutting-edge development by Pentagon military scientists. But the truth is, these strict instructions were written in the blood of indigenous peoples. It's a perfect example of how ancient knowledge surpasses technology in the wild. No smartphone will save you if you don't know how to test a berry for poison. So the edibility test gave the Cherokee a huge strategic advantage over their enemies. They could find food where other people saw only useless weeds. But finding an edible plant is only half the battle in the harsh winter. The other half involved removing its toxins and making it tasty. And in this culinary art, the Native Americans of North America simply had no equal. When we look at an oak tree, we see a beautiful tree or material for sturdy furniture. For the Cherokee and other tribes, the oak was the absolute foundation of their food security. Acorns literally littered the ground by the thousands, representing an inexhaustible source of calories. The only problem was that raw acorns taste disgusting and are highly toxic. They contain a huge amount of tannins, which cause severe poisoning and cramps. The settlers tried eating acorns during a severe famine, but quickly gave up on them. They believed that this ground-level food was meant exclusively for pigs and wild forest squirrels. But the Native Americans devised a process that chemists today proudly call cold leaching. They gathered acorns, removed their hard shells, and ground them into coarse flour. And then the true magic of ancient culinary and chemical engineering began. The Native Americans dug small pits in clean river sand and carefully lined them with leaves. They poured the acorn flour into these pits and began rinsing it with cold river water. The water slowly passed through the flour, washing away absolutely all the bitter tannins. This monotonous process could take an entire day, requiring a constant addition of fresh water. It sounds tedious, but the result was an absolutely sweet, pure carbohydrate mass. Modern laboratories use a similar principle to purify various chemical compounds. The only difference is that they have sophisticated filters, while the Cherokee had only river sand and water. The purified acorn flour was a true calorie bomb in those difficult times. It was full of fats, proteins, and complex carbohydrates that provided sustained energy. A single such flatbread could sustain a warrior's strength during a long day's march. Sometimes the Indians used a hot leaching method, boiling acorns in water over a campfire. They changed the water several times until it stopped turning dark brown. This was faster, but the hot water completely stripped the acorns of the gluten necessary for baking. Therefore, the cold method by the river was considered the gold standard among experienced Native American homemakers. After cold washing, the flour bound together perfectly and turned into dense, filling bread. Acorn bread kept incredibly well and didn't spoil even in the harshest frosts. The Native Americans took it with them on long military campaigns and extended winter hunts. Imagine a modern protein bar, only completely natural and free. White people starved just 100 meters away from oak groves simply because they didn't know this technique. They died of exhaustion while their salvation was literally falling right on their heads. Acorns from red and black oak trees were the most bitter, but they kept longer. White oak acorns were much sweeter, but they sprouted faster and spoiled in storage. The Indians knew all these nuances perfectly well and sorted the harvest with the meticulousness of experienced farmers. It was a complex agricultural system operating without a single field or tractor. The forest was their garden, and centuries-old knowledge served as their modern agricultural tools. The U.S. Army often burned acorn flour reserves during its brutal punitive raids. The generals quickly realized that this was a strategic reserve that allowed the tribes to fight in the winter. Destroying food was the most despicable, yet most effective way to break the resistance of the rebellious. Without their acorn bread reserves, the Indians could not make secret long-distance treks. This proves just how important this humble forest nut was in the history of the frontier. Today in the Appalachian Mountains, oak trees still drop tons of acorns every fall. If you know the leaching process, you'll never go hungry in this forest. Just don't try to skip this tedious cleaning step and eat them raw on the spot. Your kidneys definitely won't thank you for such a wild, concentrated dose of tannins. Ancient people were ingenious, but their methods require strict adherence to all instructions. Acorns were a reliable staple, but the Native Americans also needed other vital nutrients. Winter relentlessly dictated its harsh rules, and dry bread alone won't fill you up. The Cherokee found sources of vitamins where white people saw only dead plants. Their botanical knowledge extended to swamps, wastelands, and frozen bodies of water. And the next plant in their arsenal was a true multifunctional masterpiece of nature. Cattail is that tall plant with brown, velvety spikes growing by the water. Most people today see it simply as a pretty reed for home decor. For Native Americans, this plant was the equivalent of a modern giant supermarket. Absolutely everything in cattail is edible, depending on the season and the cook's skills. And most importantly, its giant roots could be harvested almost from under thick ice. In winter, the green above water part of the cattail dies off, but all the plant's energy goes into the rhizomes. These thick roots, hidden in the icy mud, are 80% starch. The Native Americans would break through the ice of frozen marshes and pull these starchy treasures out. In terms of pure calories, cattail root far surpasses ordinary farm potatoes. It was the perfect source of energy for the harsh winter months on the wild frontier. The process of preparing the root for consumption was ingeniously simple and incredibly effective. The roots were washed clean of marsh mud, dried over a hot fire, and ground with flat stones. The result was a fine, slightly sweet, premium quality flour free of impurities. The Native Americans used it to thicken meat stews or bake flatbreads on hot stones. Modern gluten-free flour found in expensive stores cannot compare to this wild product. But cattail provided more than just first-class food for starving Native American villages. The famous brown cattail heads held a stunning secret for winter survival. The down that matures inside them is one of the best natural insulators in the world. Native Americans stuffed their winter footwear and children's cradles with this down to retain heat. It worked exactly like the modern synthetic insulation in your expensive high-tech jackets. In addition, this dry down was an incredibly effective fire starter. A spark from flint would instantly ignite the dried cattail down, even in the dampest weather. While frozen pioneers rubbed damp branches together in vain, Native Americans could start a fire in a minute. A quick fire meant the difference between life and a painful death from hypothermia in the snow. In the Wild West, such small details often determined the outcome of the brutal battle for survival. The long cattail leaves also came in handy. They were woven into waterproof, dense mats. These mats were used to shield dwellings from the icy, biting mountain wind. Water simply rolled off the woven leaves, leaving the interior completely dry. Sounds like an advertisement for a modern, expensive camping tent with a membrane fabric, doesn't it? Except this waterproof tent grew completely free of charge in any nearby pond. The gel-like substance found between young cattail leaves acted as an anesthetic. Native Americans applied it to aching teeth or wounds to relieve severe throbbing pain. It contained mild, naturally occurring analgesic and antiseptic compounds. In the absence of pharmacies and professional doctors, this was a true lifesaver for hunters. Nature provided a complete medical kit for those who knew its hidden secrets. Army scouts were often amazed at how easily the Native Americans crossed the empty, lifeless territories. The U.S. cavalry constantly needed huge supply trains, which slowed their movement. Cherokee warriors traveled light, knowing that frozen swamps would always provide them with calories. They didn't carry food with them, they simply gathered it along their unit's route. This logistical advantage made them incredibly mobile and dangerous opponents. Today, the swamps of the United States are still densely overgrown with millions of wild cattails. Anyone armed with this ancient knowledge can easily find sustenance by the water. But most modern tourists will walk right past, dreaming of a warm hamburger and hot coffee. We have become too dependent on infrastructure, forgetting the harsh survival lessons of our ancestors. Cattail patiently awaits those who will once again learn to read the secrets of America's wild nature. So, cattail provided Native Americans with starch, warmth, fire, and even natural medicines. It is the undisputed champion among plants in terms of functionality and usefulness for the wilderness dweller. But the Appalachian forests also hid other underground surprises capable of saving people from starvation. One such surprise would later be named the Jerusalem artichoke by the arriving Europeans. And it was precisely this plant that became a true winter lifeline for entire Native American settlements in the East. Hidden in the frozen soil of North America's forests was yet another amazing, calorie-rich treasure. We call it Jerusalem artichoke, or earth pear, while the Native Americans considered it a gift from the gods. Unlike ordinary potatoes, Jerusalem artichokes are completely unfazed by harsh winter frosts. Their tubers can be left in the ground all winter and dug up as needed. It was the perfect natural storage cellar that didn't need to be specially built or guarded. The Cherokee actively cultivated this hardy plant near their summer camps. They simply buried some of the tubers in moist soil and let them grow wild. By winter, the plant had developed powerful roots, full of nutrients and clean water. When snowfalls cut off the paths to hunting grounds, the Indians simply went to their hidden plots. They broke through the frozen ground and retrieved the crisp, slightly sweet, and very juicy tubers. The main feature of Jerusalem artichoke lay in its completely unique chemical composition. Instead of the usual heavy starch, it contains inulin, which is easily absorbed by the human body. Inulin provides long-lasting, steady energy without sharp spikes in blood sugar levels. Today, nutritionists sell inulin supplements for a fortune in fancy plastic jars. The Native Americans, however, simply chewed the raw tubers or baked them in hot wood ash. For exhausted winter hunters, Jerusalem artichoke was something like a modern energy gel. It instantly quenched thirst, as it consisted of nearly 80% natural water. Its crunchy texture and slightly nutty flavor made it quite a pleasant and tasty food. European settlers, upon first tasting these tubers, were amazed by their flavor. They even began shipping them to Europe, where they quickly became a culinary hit in restaurants. Jerusalem artichoke saved hundreds of lives during the infamous Trail of Tears. When the U.S. government forcibly relocated the Cherokee, they were given virtually no proper food. People survived the grueling march only because they knew how to find wild roots. Jerusalem artichokes grew along rivers and roads, providing the emaciated Native Americans with at least some calories. It was a quiet, completely unnoticed botanical hero of that terrible historical tragedy. The Native Americans perfected the technique of baking tubers in ashes. They would dig a pit, build a fire, and then bury the tubers directly in the hot coals. After a couple of hours, the Jerusalem artichokes would turn into a tender, sweet puree right inside their tough skins. It was a simple and quick dish that didn't require heavy pots or complicated kitchen utensils. Under the harsh conditions of camping, minimalism in cooking was the key to quickly regaining strength. Modern gardeners often complain that Jerusalem artichokes grow in their beds like an aggressive weed. It is practically impossible to eradicate them from a plot once they have taken root even once. But it is precisely this incredible resilience that made them the ideal food for survival in the forest. A plant that cannot be destroyed is exactly what a starving person needs in winter. Nature created the perfect renewable food source for the harshest climatic conditions. General Washington's army, in its time, also highly valued these unassuming ground pears. During harsh winters, when soldiers were starving en masse, friendly Native Americans showed them where to dig. Without this unexpected help, the American Revolution might simply have been buried in the snow. It's amazing how a humble, dirty root can have such a profound impact on the course of world history. But textbooks rarely mention this, preferring to focus on generals and great battles. If you decide to try finding wild Jerusalem artichoke today, it won't be difficult. In the fall, its tall, sturdy stems with yellow flowers, resembling sunflowers, are visible from afar. The key is to remember the exact spot so you can return there in winter, when the flowers have long since fallen. Digging up the tubers from the frozen ground is quite a challenge for your frozen hands, but it's excellent practice for anyone who wants to experience the life of real, hardy pioneers. Jerusalem artichoke was just one of the many elements in the complex mosaic of Native American survival. It provided energy, cattail provided warmth, and the pine tree reliably supplied vitamins and medicine. It was an entire ecosystem of knowledge, where every plant played its own very specific role. But hidden among this forest abundance were deadly traps for inexperienced gatherers. And the next chapter is devoted to plants that did not forgive white settlers for their botanical ignorance. The Appalachian forest was a generous provider, but it had absolutely no tolerance for fools and amateurs. The main danger lay in the fact that many edible plants had sinister, poisonous lookalikes. They looked almost identical, smelled similar, but their sap was a deadly poison. White settlers fell victim to this natural camouflage incredibly often, mistaking the roots. The price of such a botanical mistake was always the same: a painful and very quick death. The most terrifying serial killer across the entire frontier was water hemlock, or wild hemlock. This plant looks exactly like ordinary wild parsnip or edible wild celery. It has beautiful umbellate flowers and a thick root that smells very appetizingly like carrots. The problem is that it is the most poisonous plant on the entire vast North American continent. Even a tiny piece of its root is enough to kill a grown, very strong man. The toxin, CQ toxin, strikes with incredible force directly at the human central nervous system. It causes severe muscle spasms, foaming at the mouth, and complete respiratory arrest in just 1 hour. Frontier history is full of terrifying accounts of entire pioneer families who perished after eating a stew. They thought they had found a delicious dinner, but in reality, they had dug themselves a shallow mass grave. The Cherokee Indians were well aware of this danger and avoided water hemlock like the plague. How did Native Americans reliably distinguish the deadly water hemlock from tasty edible roots? They never relied solely on the appearance of the leaves or flowers of a suspicious plant. The Cherokee always cut a found root in half lengthwise to carefully examine its internal structure. Inside the hemlock root, there are characteristic hollow chambers, clearly separated by partitions. If a Native American saw these chambers filled with a yellow, oily liquid, the root was immediately thrown away. In addition to hemlock, the winter forest treacherously concealed other plant-based time bombs. The berries of the poisonous belladonna and wolfberry looked quite appetizing against the backdrop of white snow. The settlers' hungry children often popped them into their mouths, completely unaware of the terrible consequences. From the earliest childhood, the Cherokee taught their little ones a harsh but effective rule of survival. Never eat white berries. Eat red ones with caution. Blue and black ones are usually quite safe. It sounds like a funny children's rhyme, but this simple formula saved thousands of Native American lives. Of course, there were exceptions to this color rule, but as a basic filter, it worked perfectly. The Native American education system was not about reading books, but about the rigorous study of the surrounding nature. A 3-year-old Cherokee child knew more about poisonous plants than any Harvard graduate of the time, and this knowledge had absolutely practical, everyday applications every single day of his life. Interestingly, the resourceful Native Americans sometimes found uses even for deadly poisonous plants. The sticky sap of hemlock, for instance, was actively used to poison arrowheads in war. They were brilliantly skilled at turning nature's deadly weapons against their numerous enemies. What mercilessly killed white farmers through their own foolishness, the Indians turned into a tactical advantage. This was the highest level of understanding of their region's biochemistry, achieved without any microscopes or test tubes. Army doctors were often completely powerless against severe poisonings from local plants. They tried to treat soldiers with standard European methods, such as bloodletting or emetic powders. In the case of potent natural neurotoxins, this only significantly hastened the patient's agonizing death. In such severe cases, Native American shamans used powerful charcoal-based absorbents. This ancient practice of charcoal-induced gastric lavage is now standard procedure in any emergency medical service. Knowledge of poisonous lookalikes is an essential basic skill, even for modern hiking enthusiasts. Every year, rescue teams in the U.S. use helicopters to evacuate people who have eaten strange roots in the wild. People blindly trust modern smartphone apps, which often make mistakes when identifying plants. But the wilderness offers absolutely no excuses for software glitches. Only personal knowledge and extreme vigilance can guarantee your complete safety. Poisons were a terrifying and invisible enemy, but the Cherokee medicine chest contained more than just death. Hidden in the harsh winter forest were plants capable of successfully treating the most severe illnesses and infections. It was a true green pharmacy, operating around the clock and completely free of charge. The Indians knew how to extract life-saving medicine from beneath the snow when the nearest doctor was hundreds of miles away. Let's take a look at these amazing medicinal herbs in the next part of our historical story. Life on the harsh frontier of civilization meant that even a minor scratch could be fatal. Antibiotics did not yet exist, and surgery amounted to painful amputation with a rusty, blunt saw. In such unsanitary conditions, prevention and treatment with herbs were not merely alternative medicine. It was the only real way to survive after an encounter with a bear or a blow from an axe. And the Cherokee mastered this subtle art of healing better than any European doctor of those years. One of the main hidden treasures of their winter forest pharmacy was wintergreen. This small evergreen plant stubbornly hid its tough leaves deep beneath the snowdrifts. The Native Americans persistently dug through the dense snow to extract these small leaves with their strong, minty scent. Wintergreen contains salicylic acid, which is the main chemical component of modern aspirin. Yes, the Native Americans actually invented aspirin long before it began to be sold in white tablets. Hot tea made from wintergreen leaves instantly brought down high fevers and relieved joint pain. After long winter treks knee-deep in snow, the warriors' joints ached unbearably and swelled. A thick decoction made from these leaves worked as an incredibly powerful natural anti-inflammatory. Hunters drank it every evening by the campfire so they could stand firmly on their feet again on frosty mornings. Modern athletes use salicylate-based ointments for exactly the same purpose. Another miracle of Native American field medicine was common yarrow, which grew everywhere. The Native Americans called it blood-stopping herb, and this name perfectly captures its essence. Dried yarrow leaves, ground into a fine paste, instantly clotted the blood in an open wound. Cherokee warriors always carried a small pouch of this miraculous powder in their leather travel bags. It was the ancient herbal equivalent of modern hemostatic tourniquets and hemostatic sponges. In addition, yarrow possessed powerful, natural, broad-spectrum antibacterial properties. Applied to a wound, it not only stopped the bleeding, but also prevented the decay of living tissue. European soldiers very often died of gangrene after minor wounds sustained in random skirmishes. The Native Americans, however, survived deep knife cuts and returned to duty within a couple of weeks. The secret lay in the proper use of natural antiseptics right on the dirty battlefield. Wild forest ginger, growing in the shady lowlands of the Appalachians, quickly relieved stomach problems. In winter, the Native American diet often consisted of tough dried meat and dry starchy roots. Such heavy and dry food caused serious digestive problems and severe stomach pain. A decoction made from wild ginger root stimulated the stomach and relieved absolutely any cramps within minutes. It was an indispensable digestive tonic in the harsh conditions of life on the wilderness trail. To quickly treat colds and severe lung coughs, the Native Americans used wild cherry bark. They simmered it for a long time to make a thick, dark syrup that soothed an inflamed, irritated throat. Wild cherry bark contains unique compounds that suppress the cough reflex at the neurological level. If you take a close look at the ingredients in modern cough syrups, you'll find this ingredient listed there. The pharmaceutical industry has simply copied ancient recipes and packaged them in attractive plastic bottles. Army-trained doctors initially laughed loudly at the shamans and their dirty roots. But when dysentery epidemics broke out in the freezing forts, their arrogance quickly evaporated. Desperate officers secretly turned to Native American healers for help in treating dying soldiers. And the shamans saved the garrisons using white oak bark and bitter decoctions of wild berries. Pragmatism always inevitably triumphed over prejudice when the survival of an entire army was at stake. Today, many of these powerful medicinal herbs grow right in your backyard gardens like weeds. People mercilessly spray them with pesticides, considering them useless trash that severely spoils a beautiful lawn. We are systematically destroying nature's pharmacy so that we can later drive into the city for chemical pills. The bitter irony of the modern civilized world lies in our complete detachment from nature. Native Americans would laugh heartily at such a strange and utterly illogical civilization. Finding a powerful medicine is great, but it had to be reliably preserved for the long winter. Plants lose their healing properties incredibly quickly if they are not stored and dried properly. Moisture, bright sunlight, and heat are the main enemies of any herbal medicines and vitamins. And the Cherokee developed a perfect method for drying medicinal herbs without losing their active ingredients. It was a true intuitive science, requiring strict temperature control without any thermometers. Imagine a modern, high-tech pharmaceutical laboratory with climate control. There, scientists dry valuable plant extracts at strictly controlled temperatures and humidity levels. The Cherokee did exactly the same thing, but their laboratories were ordinary wooden wigwams and caves. The Native Americans understood perfectly well. If you simply leave herbs out in the bright sun, the ultraviolet rays will destroy all the vitamins. The plant will quickly turn into useless hay that does nothing to heal or nourish the body. The main engineering secret of their technology lay in incredibly slow drying in complete darkness. The Native Americans tied the herbs into small, loose bundles to ensure maximum circulation of fresh air. These green bundles were hung right up under the ceiling of the dwelling, away from direct sunlight. It was always very dry and evenly warm there, thanks to the fire constantly burning below on the earthen floor. The smoke from the hearth created an additional barrier, repelling insects and killing bacteria on the leaves. The drying temperature was controlled by Native American women with remarkable precision without any instruments. If the herbs dried too quickly due to the heat, they became brittle and lost their valuable essential oils. The Native Americans raised or lowered the bundles, finding the ideal temperature zone right under the roof. This required an amazing intuitive understanding of the physics of warm air slowly rising upward. Experienced tribal women controlled this process as masterfully as chefs in Michelin-starred restaurants. Special containers made of birch bark were used for long-term storage of dried supplies. Birch bark possesses unique, natural antibacterial properties and provides excellent protection against moisture. Inside these airtight containers, a unique microclimate was created that perfectly preserved the herbs for years. White settlers stored their supplies in ordinary canvas sacks, where they quickly molded and rotted. Native American birch bark storage containers were the ancient equivalent of modern vacuum-sealed food containers. Juicy roots, such as Jerusalem artichokes or wild ginger, required a completely different approach to storage. They absolutely could not be simply dried by the fire, otherwise they would turn into hard, rock-like lumps. The Native Americans dug very deep pits in the sandy soil, strictly below the winter frost line. They covered the roots with dry, cool sand and ash to prevent mold and hungry mice. In this ingenious natural refrigerator, the tubers remained fresh and crisp until spring. Berries were dried in a very special way, turning them into dense, concentrated fruit pastilles. Juice was squeezed from the harvested berries, mixed with fat, and dried for a long time on flat hot stones. This product was proudly called pemmican, and it was a true carbohydrate energy bomb of its time. The pastilles could be stored for decades in a warm place without losing any of their nutritional value or flavor. Polar explorers in the 20th century survived in snowy Antarctica precisely thanks to their supplies of Native American pemmican. The U.S. Army, on the other hand, foolishly relied on mass salting meat in huge wooden barrels. Salted meat was incredibly heavy, caused terrible thirst among soldiers, and often spoiled during the long journey. Soldiers lugged tons of useless cargo, while the warriors ate light pemmican. The logistical superiority of such light, high-calorie Native American rations was obvious to all scouts, but the military bureaucracy stubbornly refused to adopt the savages' methods until the very end of the 19th century. The technology of seed preservation was a completely distinct, almost magical form of Native American art. Seeds for future spring plantings were carefully mixed with wood ash and moist river clay. The ash reliably protected the seeds from insects, and the clay prevented them from drying out or sprouting prematurely. In the spring, the Native Americans simply tossed these hard balls into the damp earth before the warm rains began. This is the absolute prototype of the modern coated seeds found in expensive agricultural supply stores. Today, we ruthlessly throw away huge amounts of food simply because we don't know how to store it. We have expensive refrigerators and chemical preservatives, but our food still rots within a week. The Native Americans had no electricity, but their forest food stores could withstand a brutal siege lasting many years. They treated every gram of calories they gathered with the utmost respect, fully understanding its value. This philosophy of absolute frugality was the foundation of an entire civilization's survival on a harsh continent. Let's take stock of this incredible historical journey into the world of Appalachian plants. The Cherokee didn't just survive the harsh winter, they thrived thanks to a deep understanding of forest biochemistry. Their methods were strictly scientific, pragmatic, and honed to perfection through centuries of practice. But there are 3 more plants we promised to discuss in detail at the very beginning of this video. These are the very lifesavers that modern, hyped-up survival experts stubbornly ignore. Most modern survival books focus on hunting, starting fires, and building shelters. YouTube experts, looking all smart, teach you how to tie complex knots and make primitive spears out of sticks. But if you break your leg in the woods and can't walk, a spear won't help you at all. True self-sufficient survival starts with knowing what's growing right under your feet in the dirt. And first on our final list of green lifesavers is the common burdock, or prickly burdock. And the third ingenious plant is the bark of the common weeping willow, which grows in abundance near bodies of water. In winter, it's easiest to spot thanks to its bright yellow-green branches, which stand out against the white snow. We've already mentioned salicylic acid, and in willow, its natural concentration is off the charts. If you're stranded in a winter forest and have developed hypothermia with a fever, the willow is your best doctor. A piece of this bark, chewed in your mouth, will quickly and effectively lower your temperature and relieve pain. The history of the conquest of the Wild West is very often presented as a story of wars and great geographical discoveries. Movies show us tough cowboys, cavalry, and the massive construction of transcontinental railroads. But the true story of survival was written not with Colt revolvers, but with deep botanical knowledge. The Cherokee Indians irrefutably proved that human intelligence and adaptability are stronger than any military machine. Their eco-friendly survival techniques were absolutely perfect for their historical time and place. This concludes our detailed analysis of the botanical secrets of the Cherokee Indians. Always remember that in the wild, victory does not go to the one with the most expensive gear in their backpack. The winner is exclusively the one who possesses knowledge and can quickly adapt to absolutely any situation. Study nature, respect the ancient wisdom of your ancestors, and never give up in difficult climatic conditions. See you in new videos, where we'll once again journey together to the dangerous and unpredictable frontier of civilization.